A Season of Change comes about because there was one scene that was deleted from Torn Canvas that I really wanted to share with readers. But there was also an unanswered question left over from the first 2 books in the series that I thought readers would like to experience firsthand. And so that is what A Season of Change does. It also provided an opportunity to be a lead-in, if you will, to Swing Vote, which is the story of Lynn's brother Marc and how he recovers from all the experiences that he has that you'll have to read Swing Vote to find out about. Enjoy.
A Season of Change is a novelette that takes place 5 months after the end of Torn Canvas, Safe Harbors number 2. It serves as a bridge between it and Swing Vote, Safe Harbors number 3. If you haven't heard Torn Canvas yet, you'll want to, before listening to this story.
A Season of Change, Safe Harbors, book number 2.5. Written by Donna K. Weaver. Narrated by Tristan Hunt. Chapter 1. Jori Virtanen stood at the screen door overlooking the large backyard where the other men had gathered. The smell of Jack's fancy barbecue smoker was already making Jori's stomach growl. It was going to be the perfect bachelor party. Friends, food, and football. He squinted at Marc where the Marine Cobra pilot talked with Jack by the smoker. Jori still hadn't had a chance to pull his friend aside. Jori swore under his breath. They needed to have an important but awkward conversation. Well, they would if Jori could figure out how to break the ugly news. Just how serious was Marc about his viper of a girlfriend? The fragrance of Olivia's perfume hit Jori just before her hand slid around his waist from behind. He covered the delicate hands with his and savored the feel of her cheek resting against his back. Such a small gesture from her, yet it always hit him with so much power. Why would this incredible woman want to spend the rest of her life with him? He turned around and pulled Olivia close for a kiss. "Whoa there," she said, a little breathless. One of the other women who had come up behind them whistled, and laughing, Olivia pushed him gently away. "Tomorrow," she whispered. The ladies crowded around them and spirited Olivia away. She blew him a kiss before letting them shuffle her into the minibus they'd rented, driver and all, for the day. Without makeup, with her hair pulled severely back and wearing a baseball cap, Olivia didn't look anything like the famous TV celebrity she was. Jori went out to the porch and followed their progress until they disappeared onto the main road. Nate, Olivia's bodyguard, had turned to watch them leave, too. The man was so much more than an employee to her, and Jori knew Nate felt the same friendship for her. He looked back at Jori, not even trying to hide his unhappiness at being left behind. Jori's stomach nodded a little. This is what came of being in love with a beautiful, intelligent, independent, and opinionated woman. Being engaged to someone as famous as talk show host Olivia Howard had proven to be almost as bad as Jori had worried, back when she had first invited him to lunch for an interview. Was it really almost 3 years ago? Jori touched the old scar on his cheek, remembering that time before all the plastic surgery, when he had convinced himself he could still scare little kids in a grocery store. He considered the road where the van could no longer be seen. An excursion of ladies to the mall in Great Falls shouldn't be dangerous, though. What psycho would think to look for Olivia there? And Lynn was a black belt, but she was also about ready to pop out that baby. His stomach twisted again. He had promised Olivia to stay out of it, but that didn't mean it would be any easier for him than it was for Nate. Jori shook his head. He was going to make himself crazy. Olivia teased him all the time that it was the woman's job to worry. If she didn't, he shouldn't. The stalker had been an anomaly. Tomorrow was a big day for Olivia. Well, for both of them. She wanted this whole wedding experience to be normal, and he wanted it to be normal for her. She had been adamant that for once she was just going to be a regular woman going to the mall with her friends. His friends, their friends now, had given her the same sense of family they had given Jori after the cruise disaster, the same loving acceptance. He understood better than anyone how lonely she had been in her celebrity prison. No one here was overly awed by her fame or asked her for favors. "You gonna just stand there moping because she's gone for the afternoon?" Marc called as he threw a football at Jori. Dodging the ball that came close to hitting him in the head, Jori scooped it up and tucked it under his arm. He leaped over the porch railing onto the grass and dashed toward the far trees they'd named as the end zone. "It's on!" Braden shouted and sprinted after him. Jori decided it was a definite disadvantage to have the two big guys, Braden and Nate, on the same team. But the two of them breathing down Jori's neck did put an extra spurt of energy into his run. When he beat them to the end zone, he whooped and did a victory dance. All right. Braden signaled for the ball and Jori tossed it to him. "We'll see how fast you run when you don't have a head start." "Team meeting," Braden shouted with a grin and jogged to the other end of the yard. "Did you give your wife any instructions?" Jori asked Nate, in spite of promising himself he wouldn't. Sometimes it was handy that Olivia's personal assistant and bodyguard were married to each other. "Of course." Nate pointed to his earpiece. "You're listening in?" Jori couldn't help the flood of relief, but if Olivia found out, she would be mad. "I think I should have gone with them, but the bus driver's an off-duty cop. Used to work in New York with me before marrying a girl from Great Falls." Nate scowled at Jori. They had not had the best beginning, and he knew Nate didn't think Jori was good enough for Olivia. Well, they agreed on that, but Jori had every intention of proving them both wrong. "If Miss Howard asked you," Nate accused, "you're going to spill it all and get me in trouble." "I won't lie to her if she asks outright." Jori sent the man a sympathetic look. "But I'll be in trouble too, for knowing and not telling her. So let's not give her a reason to ask, okay?" "You guys playing or not?" Marc called, spinning the ball into the air and catching it. "Yeah." Jori ran to join the others. A good competitive game would keep his mind busy. With a groan, Jori leaned back on the Adirondack chair. He had eaten way too much lunch. He rested his feet on one of the log stumps that surrounded the unlit fire pit, with its circle of mismatched lawn chairs. Over 3 years ago, Jori had tried to sketch the Montana ranch Braden had told him about during the cruise. Back then, Jori would never have dreamed that he would be married here. The local forecaster had called for the unusually warm September weather to continue, which was good since Olivia had her heart set on an outdoor wedding. Jori had been trying not to think about her trip to Great Falls. He glanced at his friends relaxing in the shade and smiled. Poor Mal was already asleep, availing himself of Jack's wife taking the children into town with her. Braden would be joining the state of exhaustion soon, once his baby was born. Jori closed his eyes and let his thoughts drift, as they so often did, to Olivia. Even before he had realized he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her, he would find himself wondering what it might be like. When things were really crazy with her work or he was off at art shows, he sometimes liked to imagine having the time Lynn and Braden had had on a beautiful tropical island, away from all the demands. Time just for them, but without the pirates. Wanting that kind of alone time was stupid, Jori knew. Lynn and Braden had been shipwrecked for over 2 years. When Lynn and then Braden had been rescued, they had both come back so thin. He wouldn't want their kind of island escape, but one with amenities would be nice. Jori smiled to himself. The last 5 months with Olivia had been incredible. If he were the superstitious type, he'd be looking over his shoulder waiting for the bad to come. He certainly didn't deserve someone like her. Olivia was only a couple of years older than he was, and what she had accomplished was admirable, especially with the added challenge of being a woman of color. Her Native American mother brought Olivia a surprising number of hate letters, yet she was the kindest person Jori had ever met. His fiancée noticed everything, and she always wanted to help. Jori didn't want to be jealous of the time she gave to her job. She had worked long and hard to get where she had influence in a far-reaching venue to inform people. It was her way of helping the most people. He had tried to get more involved in her work. Once. It wasn't uncommon for her to bring her work home, especially since she was having a studio built on the property. He had been over for dinner one night, and Olivia had been distracted during the meal. She had pushed her plate aside to make room for her laptop. "What are you working on there?" he had asked as he took his plate to the sink to rinse. "Just some questions for an interview." Olivia already had the laptop open. She had done this before, and Jori hadn't said anything. They had been online friends for a couple of years before meeting in person, and he knew how much time she put into her work. There had to be a way for him not to come in second. "Can I help you with anything?" Jori opened the dishwasher and loaded his dishes. "Maybe I can help you brainstorm some ideas." "No." Olivia looked at him over the top of the computer screen. "Wait." Jori took a deep breath, leaned against the counter, and folded his arms. He would not be angry, but he would fight for his place. "I can't share this part of your life." Olivia sat for a second before closing the laptop. "Will you let me look over your shoulder and give you suggestions while you paint?" "No." Jori drew out the word. "But it's not exactly the same thing." "All right, maybe that's not a fair analogy." She stood and walked gracefully toward him. When she did that, it always reminded him of her online gaming username, Sunrise Dancer, and the dreams he used to have about an elusive feminine figure in the light of a sunrise. Back before he had known SD was Olivia. He had to fight back a smile. "I'm sorry." She pulled his crossed arms apart and around her back. Olivia rested her head on Jori's chest as he embraced her. "That didn't come out right." He tried not to grin. She complained that he could steal her wits. It was funny to think that the woman who routinely interviewed public figures and celebrities, including the First Lady, could be put off her game by him. Already Jori was forgetting what they had been arguing about. Had they been arguing? He closed his eyes, enjoying her closeness but trying to cling to his thought. "Olivia," he finally said when she didn't speak. The dark eyes she raised to meet his had smudges of fatigue under them. He kissed her forehead. "How come some people get to help?" He nodded toward the small wing where Nate and his wife lived. "But I can't." "I'm kind of territorial about some things." She reached up and then took his cheeks in her hands. Olivia pulled down his face and teased his mouth with her warm, soft lips. The smell and feel of her swirled through his senses, almost turning his brain to putty. "Olivia," Jori mumbled against her lips. She broke the kiss. "Are you trying to distract me?" he asked. "No, but I'll behave." Olivia laughed and let go. "I can see that this is an important conversation for us to have, and I appreciate that you're willing to have it." She took his hand and pulled him to the sofa where she pushed him down on one end, and then curled up with her feet underneath her on the other end. "Okay," Jori said when she just sat considering him. "What's the conversation?" "Well," she ran a finger through her long hair, "you know how important my work is to me, as is yours. For both of us, it defines us." "No, it doesn't." Jori thought of how he had walked away from his agent last spring because the man had asked him to make a choice between the gallery and Jori's family. It had been a no-brainer decision, and he didn't regret it. He was doing just fine determining his own future and not jumping at the orders of another person. "Fine," Olivia said. "Your art defines you." Jori shook his head. "If I had to give it up for you, I would, this very minute." "And you'd be miserable." Olivia's eyes softened, the corners of her mouth curving in a sympathetic smile. "Not if you were with me." He shifted close to her. "Maybe not at first." She leaned her head on his shoulder and he put his arm around her. "I would never ask you to give up your art." "I don't get this whole discussion," Jori said. "I asked if I could help you brainstorm, not give up your work." "Not yet." What did that mean? Jori kept his mouth shut because he didn't know what to say. He had a feeling this was one of those guy-girl situations where they were speaking the same language, but the words meant different things to each of them. It didn't help that Olivia was brilliant with people, and Jori felt like he was still a backward child when it came to meaningful relationships. If there was a misunderstanding, it had to be his fault. I would never ask you to give that up. Jori put gentle pressure on her shoulder until she was lying back against the oversized, cushy arm of the sofa. It's who you are, and I know how much you love what you do. Her eyelids closed. There's a but in your tone. I want to be an important part of your life. Olivia opened her eyes, now full of fire, and he knew he had ticked her off. You are the most important part of my life, she said, her lips thin. That's why I'm marrying you. It's just that when we're together, I want us to be together. You already resent that I brought work home? Jori straightened. That makes me sound like some needy chick. He had gone back to his end of the sofa. Don't be sexist. Olivia had sat up and scooted over to his end. She had pressed him back so he leaned against the overstuffed arm, and it was she holding herself over him. You malauta, but she was beautiful. Jori had hoped she would kiss him then, but she hadn't. I brought that work home so I could get ahead and not have to worry about it during our honeymoon. She had pressed her lips lightly on the scar under his left eye, and then made a trail of kisses down his cheek and to his ear, where she had whispered, So we can be together when we're together. I never said you shouldn't bring work home, Jori had said when he could get his breath. I only asked if I could help. I'll let you know when the time is right. Olivia had kissed him then. Sitting in another Adirondack chair, a snore from Lynn's brother Marc broke Jori's pleasant reverie. They were lucky to have Marc there. Only the rule about Cobra pilots not being allowed to stay in a combat zone more than a year had made it possible for Lynn's brother to attend the wedding. He snored again. Chuckling, Jori shifted to give the man a nudge. What? Marc jerked, his arms reaching for something that wasn't at his waist. When he seemed to realize he was in Montana and not in a war zone, he relaxed but sent Jori a dirty look. Sorry, Jori said. Jumpy, aren't you? You have no idea. Marc relaxed, leaning back again. Maybe better than you think. Even 3 years after the disastrous cruise ship excursion, Jori still found himself twitchy at the oddest times. Oh, right, pirates. Marc's eyes drooped. Hey, I need to talk to you. Jori kept his voice low and checked to see if the others were sleeping. When he turned back, Marc had closed his eyes and was softly snoring again. Poor guy was still adjusting to the time difference. Somehow, Jori had to talk to him. Alone. With a house full of people and so much work preparing for the wedding, Jori hadn't found the time or the opportunity yet. It didn't help that he hadn't settled on how to bring up the subject of Marc's girlfriend. Lynn's brother had met Scarlett when his unit was doing training in Georgia. Jori had never been able to get Marc to share a picture of the girl. He said she was camera shy. The family was curious that even in social media she never posted her own pictures. Last month, Lynn had somehow managed to finagle Scarlett into joining the family's online video chat. Jori and Olivia had both thought the young woman looked vaguely familiar, and not in a good way. Even though they had both felt bad about doing it, they had agreed to have Olivia's fact-checker do some checking. The guy was really one of the top private investigators in the country. Jori trusted the facts that Jose had discovered about Scarlett Dalton. So how did Jori broach the subject to Marc? Hey, dude, I think your girlfriend's got a husband already? Well, they knew she'd been married to 2 different men. 2 old, rich guys, and one of them was dead. She was still married to the other one. Jori rubbed his face. Marc wasn't rich. So why was she after him? Jori tapped his fingers on the arm of the lawn chair. He couldn't wait until the girls got back. He glanced around the group. After the football games and Jack's barbecue spread, everyone was dozing. It was now or never. Marc. Jori kept his voice low. You still awake? Lynn's brother opened one eye. Jori cringed. Olivia would have been better at this, but it was Jori who had been through so much with Marc. Marc must have seen it because he opened both eyes and straightened in his chair. What's on your mind? Jori grabbed at anything. Talk to me about marriages you know that have worked. Are you all right? Marc asked. His face caught somewhere between a frown and a look of surprise. Hey, I'm getting married tomorrow. I need all the inspiration I can. What about your parents? Marc sat in silence for a few seconds, and Jori could have kicked himself for bringing them up. He knew how much Marc and Lynn missed them. Jori still regretted not meeting them before they had been killed in a car crash. I wish Scarlett could have met them, Marc finally said. I'm sure if she'd seen them together, she wouldn't be so afraid of commitment. Or over-commitment, Jori wanted to say, but he kept the thought to himself. Marc was taking the discussion just where it needed to go. Sure, Marc said. Lots of people make mistakes and end up getting divorces, but lots of people work things through. My parents didn't have a perfect marriage, but they didn't give up on each other. He gave a soft laugh. When I was 16, I was worried about them. Lynn was busy at college, and it was just me still at home. I guess they'd had an argument and had barely spoken to each other for over a week. I finally got enough courage to ask my mom about it. What did you say to her? I asked right out if they were going to get a divorce. She took my face in her hands and told me she'd never once thought about divorcing my father. Killing him, yes. Divorcing him, no. Jori chuckled. I think. He checked to see if he had wakened the other men. I think I would have liked your mom, Jori said in a quieter voice. Yeah, they made up less than an hour later. Marc glanced toward his brother-in-law and whispered, Braden's not the kind of guy I'd have expected Lynn to fall for. Well, except for his height. Lynn was always so self-conscious about her own height that she only dated really tall guys. You really wouldn't? You should have seen them on the ship. Jori didn't mention that he had made a move for Lynn very early on, which she had wisely rebuffed, and had the good grace never to mention again. I thought maybe it had something to do with them being shipwrecked together for so long with no one else to turn to. Marc scowled. I wouldn't want to be joined at the hip like they are. It'd drive me nuts. I used to think like that. Jori tried to keep his grin from getting too broad. Marc's look of disgust made Jori chuckle again. And look at you now. Marc leaned back his head. At least you have an excuse. You're getting married tomorrow. But Braden's been back for 5 months now. When's all the mushy stuff gonna stop? I don't want it to, Jori said, becoming serious. Not for them, not for me and Olivia. He needed to say this right, plant the seeds of doubt. You must not be serious enough about Scarlett. What makes you think that? Marc's entire body tightened. Look around you, Marc. I don't think it's just me and Olivia. Watch Elle and Mal, Darcy and Ashlyn, even Jack. They both looked at the rancher snoring loudly from a hammock strung between 2 large trees. Braden's dad is a newlywed. And cheesily happy. Jori shot his friend a meaningful look. No offense, but you don't seem cheesily happy when you talk about Scarlett. Marc shot him a dirty look. She's got some funny ideas about marriage. You've talked about marriage, then. Jori kept his face neutral. Things could be farther along than they had feared. I told her when I called last night that I was ready to get serious. And? No, please. Scarlett said she might be ready to talk about it. She might be ready to talk about marrying Marc? Jori lost his train of thought. Was she planning to divorce her old man husband? Was he dying? A cold chill swept Jori. Was she one of those sick black widows who married men and then killed them off? He shut down the ridiculous train of thought. In the chair on Jori's other side, Nate sat up abruptly. The log ottoman he had been resting his feet on went rolling. Nate put a hand to his ear. What's happening? Jori jumped to his feet. Chapter 2. Nate shook his head and put a finger in his other ear. All the guys stood and came closer to the bodyguard. What is it? Braden whispered. The girls? Jori nodded. Braden swore and shoved a hand in his pocket, searching for something, probably his keys. Great Falls is an hour and a half away. Jori put a hand on Braden's arm. How could we possibly get there in time to help? Mal, who had been listening on Jori's right, swore then too. Nate gave a sharp signal with one hand. Everyone went silent. Someone's recognized Olivia, Nate finally said in a low voice. Jori exchanged glances with Jack. The two of them had discussed with Braden the possibility of the press finding out. The ranch was off a private lane set back from the public road. Anyone trying to crash the wedding could be arrested for trespassing, but that didn't mean it wouldn't disrupt the event. Lots of people in Lewiston knew Jori, if only because he had taught some art classes at the high school for the last couple of years. It had been easy for Jack to enlist help from some discreet people in case they were needed. A simple phone call would set those plans in motion. It had been a tough decision. Bring in too many people and risk word getting out. And if the paparazzi did find out, nothing could be done to stop them from hiring a helicopter and flying over the event. She and Jori had waited to publicly announce their engagement until a couple of weeks ago. At the time, they had hinted that the wedding might take place in a couple of years. Finding out Olivia was in Montana shouldn't make the paparazzi think wedding unless... Jori rubbed his face. Unless someone saw her carrying the wedding veil Nate's wife Michaela had ordered for delivery at a local wedding shop. That would be sure to bring the paparazzi in droves. "A little girl recognized her," Nate said quickly before covering his ears again. Jori tried to imagine the scene. Would the kid be discreet like Braden's niece, Kate? Or shout something out and bring attention to them? Were there people mobbing them even now? Nate chuckled then. "That Elle," he whispered and shot Mal a look of approval. "She's a fast thinker." "So?" Braden asked. "Shh." Nate scowled and pushed his finger into his other ear again. Jori let out a deep breath. Lynn's best friend Elle was the friendliest person he'd ever met. If anyone could put a disarming spin on the situation, it would be her. But could she do that to a crowd, surrounded by people with phone cameras and easy access to all kinds of social media? "Kid's mom is a huge fan," Nate said, breaking in again. Marc leaned in and kept his voice low. "Should we head to Great Falls in case someone decides to follow them back here?" Braden pulled out his keys. "Should Jack call his friends for tomorrow?" Jori asked. Nate shook his head. "Elle just invited the mom and daughter to come with them to get some chocolate." "So they're just the two?" Marc asked. Nate scowled again but nodded. "No need to go there then," Marc said to Braden, who still looked undecided. Everyone hovered around Nate for a few more minutes, but he didn't offer any more information. Jori sat down again, and the other men followed his example. "They don't have the veil yet." Nate sat down. "That'll be their last stop." "So the woman won't blab to the world?" Jori asked. "Not until Monday," Nate said. "Elle got her and her daughter to agree not to tell a soul. That Elle can tell quite a sob story when she wants to. Really laid the guilt on them." The big man ran a hand through his short hair. "I think she might have even made the little girl cry. She was sure pleading with her mother not to spoil Olivia's only chance for a normal vacation." "That's my Elle," Mal said with a chuckle before turning to Nate. "You are a sly dog. I can't believe you've been spying on them." "Not exactly spying, any more than I spy when I'm on the job." Nate shrugged. "What she doesn't know won't hurt her. Just don't say anything about it." He sent Jori a warning look. Jori kept silent. Once again, the fewer people who knew what Nate had done to protect Olivia without her knowing about it, the better. When the bus drove up to the ranch house, Jori sat with the rest of the men on the wide porch, their feet resting on the rail. They had all decided to put on a Jack attitude, chewing on toothpicks. Only Mal seemed a little out of place, holding his sleeping baby daughter. Jori hadn't had a chance to continue his conversation with Marc, but had thought of a possible way to put an end to the Scarlet thing. Maybe. Jori needed to talk with Olivia about it first and see what she thought. The bus driver got out first. Jori didn't miss the nod he exchanged with Nate. For the first time, Jori wondered if Nate had made some other arrangements besides the driver. Maybe another off-duty officer to follow them while they were in Great Falls? The mall there was decent-sized. Jori cut off that train of thought. He wouldn't ask. Better not to know. Now, if that mother and daughter really did keep quiet. Elle was the first one to the porch. She reached for the baby, kissed her husband, and hurried into the house where she could nurse the infant in private. Mal followed her inside. Jori stayed in his seat since Olivia hadn't exited the bus yet. The ladies were laughing as they joined their husbands, most of them carrying packages. No one seemed upset. Olivia finally stepped off and made room for the driver to offer a hand to Lynn. Jori hadn't spent any time around pregnant women until Elle. He had been amazed to watch her usually slender form grow all distorted, had even felt the baby kick. The whole circle of life thing seemed to be everywhere around him. When a tingle went down the back of his neck, he turned his attention to Olivia. She was watching him as he had been watching Lynn. His fiancée had one of those contemplative expressions she got sometimes, but her eyes danced. Whatever had happened earlier hadn't ruined her day. Braden was already headed down the steps, so Jori followed. He went to Olivia's side and kissed her while taking the bags from one of her hands. She held his arm and leaned her head against his shoulder, watching as Braden took Lynn's packages in one hand and offered his arm to her for support. "Aren't they sweet?" Olivia whispered. "He's so attentive." Jori pursed his lips. Both Mal and his brother Darcy had suggested Jori pay attention to the things Olivia said she liked. But a woman could like something she saw in another couple, but resent it for herself. So what did she mean? His soon-to-be wife had worked long and hard by herself to get where she was. She was so independent. Would she take attentiveness from him as a sign that he thought she wasn't capable? "Oh, by the way, Marc." Olivia paused on the porch where Lynn's brother still sat. Marc got to his feet. Jori opened his mouth to say something in case Olivia was going to mention Scarlett, but he stopped. No way would she do something so clueless. "I almost forgot," Olivia said. "Jori was telling me all about the humanitarian work you've been involved with overseas. I would love to do a show about it. Maybe we could get more donations for the orphanage." "I don't know." Marc ran a hand over his short hair, considering. "I'm just a helper with one of the army units. Their commander is willing to let them do some things. A lot of commanders won't allow any participation at all. They say their mission's not humanitarian. It's kind of a delicate balance, and I don't dare do anything to mess it up. I'll pass your offer on, though."
"All right."
She smiled and patted his arm.
"I can still send some things over for the orphanage, can't I? Even if I don't do the show."
"That would be great. When I get back, I'll send you a list of what they need."
"Perfect," Olivia said.
Jori held the door open to Jack's large ranch house, and she went through, ahead of him. "So you like attentive," he said as the screen door closed behind him. "How much attentive is too much?"
"That's a really sweet question."
Olivia turned to face him. She lifted a hand and caressed his cheek.
"I'm glad you asked, because I'm not used to having anyone this close to me. You know how attentive my parents weren't. If something bothers you, like me bringing my work home, let me know. I'll do the same."
"Okay. Just don't make me guess and then get ticked off if I get it wrong." He leaned down so their faces were close, and he spoke softly. "More than anything, I want you to be happy." Olivia dropped the bags in her other hand, slid her arms around his neck, and kissed him. Her warm lips were firm at first, almost as though she was determined to make a point about something. Only when his arms pulled her close did her mouth become soft and pliant. Someone whistled and they broke apart. As much as Jori loved these people, that was really getting old.
"We weren't that bad, were we?"
Elle asked Mal as she handed him the sleeping baby.
"Oh, yeah,"
Mal's brother Darcy said, smiling.
"You two were every bit as bad." "We weren't as bad as you and Ashlyn,"
Mal argued.
"Isn't that right, Braden?"
Lynn was giving Braden a silly grin, her cheeks bright red. Neither said anything. Jori picked up Olivia's packages and choked back a laugh. With the amount of romance that was in the house, they might even come across Jack and his wife necking in the kitchen. Now that would be embarrassing. His stomach rumbling, Jori stepped quietly down the stairs. Light leaked under the closed kitchen door, and he paused. Who else was up at this hour? He rested his ear against the door. Was it too much to hope it might be Marc? Jori mentally crossed his fingers and pushed open the door. Lynn, a wet washcloth in her hand, stood beside her brother. They turned at the swooshing of the door.
"You're up late,"
Marc said.
"Are you feeling all right?"
Lynn peered at Jori. It reminded him so much of Elle that he laughed. "I swear, Lynn," Jori said. "Did you and Elle go to the same school of motherology?" She made a face and threw the washcloth at him. He didn't even have to duck. She couldn't hit anything to save her life, except karate punches and kicks. Besides, Jori said as he picked up the cloth and handed it back to her, "Shouldn't I be asking you that?" He pointed to her huge belly and tried not to look smug. She had no idea how much she had contributed to his collection of sketches of pregnant couples during this visit. Later, when Lynn had her figure back, he would show them to her. Right now, as big as she was, she would kill him if she knew he'd been drawing her.
"I told you, sis,"
Marc said with a smirk. "Oh, shut up, both of you." She tossed the dirty cloth into a bucket by the door to the laundry room. "I'm fine. I just can't go to sleep for some reason." "I hope you're not worried about the wedding." Jori put a hand on her shoulder. "We didn't mean to make a lot of work for you." "Are you kidding?" Lynn's eyes watered and she wiped them irritably. "I wouldn't miss this for the world. I'm so happy for both of you." The door swished open again and Braden stood squinting against the bright kitchen light. "I know, sweetheart," Lynn said before the tall man could say a word. She reached out a hand and Braden took it. As he always seemed to do, he put an arm around her shoulders and rested his other hand on her belly. She said, "I couldn't sleep and I didn't want to wake you." Marc shot Jori a knowing look and Jori moved to stand beside him. "Then you're not in love with Scarlett," Jori whispered, "or you'd get it." "Whatever." Marc yawned and said louder,
"I should get to bed."
He nudged Jori.
"And you, Mr. Groom, need your beauty sleep."
"Very funny." Jori straightened and wiped his now sweaty palms. It was now or, well, not never, but there had to be a way to break the news without ruining their friendship. "Wait a sec, Marc. I hate these pregnancy emotions." Lynn reached a hand toward her brother, blinking a few times. "When we were on the island, I used to dream about having a barbecue with the family." She smiled up at Braden before continuing. "It's what kept me going when things were so bad. Then when I was rescued and you were lost." "I know." Braden held her closer. "And then I found out Mom and Dad were dead." Lynn looked at her brother. "I thought I'd never get my barbecue. Until today." Marc pulled his sister into an embrace. A little overwhelmed by the emotion, Jori pushed Braden back beside his wife.
"Group hug,"
Jori said to lighten things up. He squeezed the group. They all laughed and broke apart. "But I should mention that it was really my barbecue." Jori glanced between the two other men. "Please don't tell me I filled the role of your dad, Lynn." "Nah." Braden pulled his wife close. "I'm pretty sure that was my father."
"More mushy time,"
Marc grumbled and gave Jori a quick push toward the kitchen door.
"I'm out of here."
Outside the kitchen, Marc hurried to the stairs and jogged up. Jori stood at the bottom watching his friend disappear, unsure what to do. Nothing, he decided. He glanced back at the door. So much for his midnight snack. Exhaling, Jori headed up the stairs. At least Marc wouldn't be headed to Georgia to see Scarlett any time soon. Crazy to think the Middle East could be the safer place for the Marine. Chapter 3. The next afternoon, facing a lawn full of guests, Jori rubbed his ice-cold hands and took a deep breath. Braden gave his shoulder a sympathetic jab. Standing a few feet away and dressed in a suit, Nate chuckled. "Hey!" Jori scowled at him. Nate opened his mouth to respond, but Ramey's exquisite cello rendition of Vivaldi's Spring from Four Seasons began, and the audience rose from their lawn chairs. Jori stretched to get a glimpse of Olivia through the vibrant fall colors that dressed the exterior of the Randolph Ranch home. She had kept her wedding dress a secret, telling him only that he should stick to black and/or white for his tux. He knew there had to be red somewhere, perhaps in her bouquet, because his and Braden's boutonnieres were red. Little 9-year-old Kate, looking so grown up in a white dress with a red ribbon at her waist, came around the corner of the house taking small handfuls of red rose petals and sprinkling them on the grass before her. When she noticed Jori watching her, the little girl gave him a huge grin, tossing the next handful even higher. The light breeze sent the petals back into her face, and she swatted at them, which caused her to stumble. With flaming cheeks, she paused to get in step with the music and started walking again. He bit back a laugh, not wanting to add to her embarrassment. At an ooh from the guests, Jori stretched up on his toes, catching a flash of moving white between the leaves. He hoped the photographer was getting shots of his bride there. His bride. Olivia turned the corner and came into full view on the arm of a friend from college. Jori wasn't surprised at the simplicity of the white satin dress itself, but he squinted to see the sheer white veil better in the shade of the trees. She had told him she would use one Finnish custom, a gold wedding crown. "What is that beaded thing?" Braden asked under his breath. Jori shifted his gaze to what he thought was part of the dress, and recognized now as a beaded, fringed Native American necklace. A choker, it flowed out from the base of her throat and spread over the curve of her breasts, narrowing to a point that almost reached her waist. He looked up to find her watching him, the corners of her mouth curved in a slight smile. "Braden, can you believe she wants to be with me?" "No." "Shut up." Yori's mouth went dry and he scanned the guests. Did everyone else there know he wasn't good enough for her? His eyes darted to where Lynn sat beside Elle, little Gwendolyn bouncing on her mother's lap. They grinned at him. An odd look crossed Lynn's face that reminded Jori of something. Before he could think what it was, Olivia stood before him, her soft hand being placed in his. Swallowing the lump in his throat, Jori turned with her to face Minister of Marriage Nate. The bodyguard had taken to calling himself that after Olivia had asked him to get an online license to perform the marriage. "I love you," Jori whispered, putting all his feelings into the words. "Don't make me cry and ruin my makeup." Olivia blinked and squeezed his hand before facing forward.
Welcome.
Nate cleared his throat, the book he held before him trembling a little.
Today we've gathered to share an important day in the lives of Miss,
His eyes widened.
Olivia and Jori, and to witness in the creation of a new family. Jori Virtanen, do you take Olivia Nasha Howard to be your lawfully wedded wife and promise to love and adore her, to share her good times as well as her disappointments, to stay with her forever?
"I do," Jori said without hesitation, his voice coming out louder than he meant to. There was some scattered laughter from the guests. Olivia ran her thumb down his palm.
Olivia Nasha Howard, do you take Jori Virtanen to be your lawfully wedded husband, to love and adore him, to share in his accomplishments as well as his hard times, to stay with him forever?
Olivia squeezed Jori's hand as she said, "Forever."
As you give shelter to each other, you will feel no rain.
Nate's voice took on a sing-song quality like he was quoting poetry.
Bringing warmth to each other, you will feel no cold. Each of you will be a companion to the other and keep away loneliness. You were two persons, but there lies only one life before you. May beauty surround your journey together, happiness be your companion, and may your days upon the earth be long and good.
He turned to Olivia.
What gift did you bring to this union?
Her maid of honor held out a large envelope. Olivia released Jori's hand and opened it, pulling out a card. "My gift is the creation of the Virtanen Scholarship Endowment for the James Lintner School of the Arts." Jori nodded to Braden, who handed him a similar envelope. Jori read his card. "I give the creation of the Howard Endowment for the Treatment of Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder." Nate stood a little taller, gazing first at Olivia and then at Jori.
Olivia and Jori, are you ready to enter into this marriage, believing the love you share and your faith in each other will endure all things?
They looked at each other and said together, "Yes." Her eyes glistened and made Jori's burn.
With the power vested in me,
Nate said,
I hereby proclaim you to be married, husband and wife. You may kiss the groom.
Jori shot the bodyguard a dark look. Aware of their watching friends, Jori leaned in to give his wife a chaste little kiss, but she threw her arms around his neck and made sure there was nothing little about it. When some of the guys started hooting their approval, Olivia pulled away. Jori followed her mouth for another kiss, but laughing, she gave him a soft push back and took his hand. Turning toward the standing guests, they began to make their way back up the grassy aisle. Jori sought out Elle and Lynn, pausing at the ladder. Her eyes were closed and her lips pinched in a tight O. Jori realized she was panting. He knew what that earlier expression had reminded him of. Not again. "Brayden," Jori shouted. "Lynn's having the baby." As Elle turned to her friend with wide eyes, Lynn let out a groan that no one could miss. Brayden dashed past Jori. "Why didn't you say you were having contractions?" Elle hissed. "Call her doctor." Brayden tossed Jack his phone and picked up Lynn. "Tell him we're on our way to the hospital." "No," Lynn grunted, pulling in on herself. "Take me inside. I need to push. I can feel something down there." "What were you thinking?" Brayden grumbled as he strode across the grass. "I thought I had time. You're the best man. I didn't want to spoil the... Lynn started panting again. Jori stood with Olivia's hand in his and watched with the rest of the guests as Brayden and Lynn swept around the flaming foliage Olivia had so recently passed. Everyone seemed in the same state of shock Jori was. His wife released his hand and clapped hers to get everyone's attention. "It seems that mine and Jori's special moments are destined to coincide with those of our dear friends." Olivia gave Jori a quick kiss before turning back to the guests. "Please come and have something to eat and celebrate with us as we wait to meet this new little person. We will join you in a moment." Their friends headed to the table set up for that purpose on the lawn. Jori moved to put his arm around his wife's shoulders, stopping when he couldn't see how to do it without disturbing the long veil. He finally slid his arm underneath it and around her waist, pulling her closer. "You're amazing, you know." Olivia ran her hand over his cheek, her finger tickling his lips. The hair on his arm stood up. "Just wait." She lifted her face and brushed his lips with her own, a teasing touch full of promises. A male cough at their side broke them apart. They turned to find Raimi standing a few feet away. The boy had changed in the 2 years since he had been Jori's neighbor and used to collect his mail for him when Jori had to travel. "Sorry." Raimi examined his shoes. "You two have done so much for me that I couldn't wait to congratulate you." Looking up, the young man thrust out his hand to Olivia, but she used it to tug him closer and kiss his cheek. Jori hadn't thought the kid's skin could get any darker, but it did. After a quick hug of his own, Jori released him. "Thank you, Raimi. You played beautifully." "It was perfect." Olivia took Jori's hand and Raimi's arm, and they strolled toward the other guests. "I'm glad you were able to get a break. Are you liking it at Jori's art school?" It wasn't Jori's art school, but he didn't argue with his wife. A thrill rushed through him. His wife. He resisted the temptation to shout it. Jori grinned at the way Raimi's entire face lit up. The boy went off talking excitedly. Jori had approached him about attending the art school, right after getting word it would open that fall. The young man's talent was too special not to develop to its fullest potential. Raimi finally paused to take a breath. Embarrassed, he ducked his head again and excused himself. Others came over to Jori and Olivia to offer their congratulations. Neither of them had wanted a formal reception line. Jori's stomach growled, and he looked longingly at the delectable spread. When there was a lull, Olivia took his hand and pulled him toward the food. They had gotten to the table, and the sound of a baby crying reached them from the house. Jack's wife appeared at the door. "It's a girl." That was pretty fast, wasn't it? His stomach churning, Jori stared at Olivia, his face serious. "Don't you ever do that." "Have a baby?" The corner of her mouth twitched. "At home." He took her hand. "The doctor isn't even here yet. Do you realize Brayden just delivered his own kid?" Olivia leaned her forehead against his chest, her shoulders shaking. "Then I better not tell you how my mother's people used to give birth." The sound of a car racing down the long lane to the house drew their attention. As the doctor hopped from the car, Jack called from the front porch.
"You're too late, Steve, but come on in anyway. I think Brayden would rather play the father than the doctor."
Jori and Olivia were forgotten. He turned back to his wife and found her watching him. "I think everyone's distracted by the baby," she whispered. Slipping his arms around her, Jori breathed her in, the smell of her perfume filling his senses. He used his lips to make a trail up her cheek to her ear. And And why are we still here? Olivia reached behind her and took his hand. Forgetting his hunger, Jori grinned, pulling her to the side of the long drive, where they skirted the guests' parked vehicles until they got to his car, already packed for their honeymoon. They slipped into the SUV, and through the rearview mirror, he watched their guests look in their direction. Olivia waved out the window as they drove away. Chapter 4. Jori glanced at Olivia as the waiter handed him the bill for their breakfast. Several times during the meal she had checked her phone. They had been married less than 24 hours, and she was already worried about work. "You expecting a call?" Jori asked. "Oh, but, I'm sorry." Olivia dropped the phone into her purse. Jori was still getting used to the Apache term for endearment. The first time she had used it, he'd asked if she was cursing at him. His tendency to swear in Finnish fascinated her, and he had wondered if she was doing it to pay him back. "I've been hoping Braden would send us a picture of the baby," she said. "I should have known." He looked at his watch. "We've got a little time before we need to leave for the raft tour, and we have to get our things from the cabin anyway. Let's call them online." "I love you." Olivia supported her cheek in the palm of one hand and gave him one of those soft, dreamy smiles she saved just for him. "That's what I live for," Jori said. If she kept looking at him like that, they weren't going to be talking to anyone. He rose and reached out a hand to her. "Come on." "I almost forgot," she said once they were outside in the beautiful Jackson Hole weather. "Did you ever have a chance to talk to Marc about Scarlett?" The emphasis she put on the woman's name made it clear exactly what Olivia thought of her. "Well, yes and no. We got interrupted when—" Jori steeled his face at his near slip. It wasn't something I wanted to talk to him about in front of the others. He told Olivia what Marc had shared. "I'm not sure how far we dare go with this. I thought I could tell him so he could break it off. To be honest, I'm not sure I could have told him even if there'd been time." "So what do we do?" Olivia paused at the door to their cabin while Jori unlocked it. "Send Jose to what? Threaten her?" "I did wonder about that. Does your fact-checker really threaten people?" Jori teased. "He's sounding kind of ominous now." "He helped me find you, Mr. Elusive Artist." Olivia brushed by him and into the cabin. "I have never asked Jose to do anything illegal." "I'm just kidding." Jori paused. "When did you first send him after me?" Someday Jori was going to convince her to show him the files she had accumulated. All in the name of research for an interview, she had assured him. "Before you went on the cruise and had the run-in with pirates." Olivia reached up and touched the scar again. "Jose's the one who brought the picture of you saving the kids. You were such an enigma. The playboy model who risked his life to save a couple of children." She pulled his face down for a long kiss. "If you keep that up," Jori said, his voice husky, "we'll have to reschedule the rafting trip." "Tempting, but I better take a rain check." Olivia kissed him one more time. "Besides, we have a call to make and Marc's situation to figure out." Olivia put a hand on his when he reached toward the laptop. "I can tell something else is on your mind." "Scarlett's a cheater, whatever else she might be." Jori pushed the computer's power button. "Whatever else she might be? What are you thinking?" Olivia paused, squinting. "Wait, you don't mean—" Olivia turned Jori to face her, her eyes wide. "You're not thinking she's a Black Widow?" Hearing his worries spoken aloud made them seem even stupider than he had thought in Montana. "Let's see what your amazing fact-checker thinks, okay?" "This is even bigger than our worry about Marc. If there's a chance her current husband is in danger, we have an obligation to do something." Before Jori could respond, Olivia shook her head and said, "You're right. Let's see what Jose thinks. I hope your instincts are correct about Marc not really being in love with her. Right now, I feel so bad for him." "Me too." Jori lifted Olivia's chin and gave her a quick kiss. He turned on the chat. "You're on your honeymoon, for heaven's sake," Elle said when she answered Jack's computer. "What are you doing calling us?" She shifted the webcam so everyone in the large Randolph living room could be seen. "Braden never sent Olivia a picture of the baby," Jori said. "Oops." Braden stepped into view holding a tiny bundle. Len's resting, so you two can see how well Marc handles this little lady. Marc took an involuntary step back.
Oh, come on,
Mal called from the couch where he bounced his own daughter.
You've held a baby before. Not a newborn. You can do this.
Jack appeared behind Marc's right shoulder.
Like this.
Jori grinned as the silver-haired man took the infant, one hand gently and confidently under the baby's head, and the other one holding her bum.
Unlike my cattle and horses,
Jack said.
This little beauty's head is too heavy for her to support without help.
Here,
put your hand behind her neck.
But... Marc managed to stutter before Jack had deftly put the tiny bundle in the hand Braden had pushed up. Marc swore but moved his other hand up to her tiny bottom. Without thinking about it, he shifted her head to the crook of his arm and supported her whole body so he could brush away a bubble at the corner of her mouth. Look, he's a natural, Elle said. Don't let Len hear you talk like that around the baby, Braden said, his light tone taking out the censure. Now hold her up so Olivia can see. She's so tiny. Marc lifted the elbow he had supporting her head. Jori didn't miss when Olivia's breath caught. He checked out the little button mouth, the turned-up nose, and even the perfect arch of her eyebrows. Too soon to decide what might be from Len and what might be from Braden. The baby's little lips puckered and she nuzzled her face into Marc's chest. Sorry, kid, I got nothing for you. He laughed. Let me take her back to her mother, Jack's wife Emily said, coming forward. Braden, it's ironic, Jori said, that in spite of you and Len being rescued from that island, you still ended up delivering your daughter. Len said almost those exact words when I handed her the baby. Braden ran a finger down the infant's cheek before Emily took her away. Have you decided on a name yet? Olivia asked. Kira, Braden said. Kira? Marc asked. Like Keira Knightley? Different spelling. Braden yawned. C-I-A-R-A. Why would you do that to a kid? Marc asked. I think it's pretty, Olivia said. Yeah, it's pretty, Marc said. But no one will be able to spell her name. She won't be able to have a keychain or a cup with her name on it. Braden grinned at his sister, Ashlyn. It's kind of a family tradition on our mother's side, he said, to use Celtic names. Lynn chose it. I only asked that it be Irish. Are there any Randolph naming traditions? Jori asked Jack. Just to use American names. He jerked open a newspaper. That's why her middle name is Kathleen, Braden said, keeping his face neutral. That's a good American name. Jack lowered the newspaper and glowered at his son. Sorry, Dad, you're too easy to tease. Braden chuckled. The older man grunted. But Jori thought it was to cover a laugh. Kira Kathleen, Marc said, giving the beginning of each a harsh sound. So maybe not Kathleen, Braden said. But seriously, Len likes Autumn for a middle name. Kira Autumn Randolph? Her initials will spell car, Elle sighed. Lynn, of all people, should know better. Said the woman who gave her daughter the name Lynn hates. Marc sent Elle a disbelieving scowl. We aren't always going to call her Gwendolyn. Elle picked up her daughter and blew on her neck, making the baby giggle. We're thinking of calling her Dolly. Next to Jori, Olivia's body shook. Thanks for letting us barge in, Jori said. We're heading out to go whitewater rafting. He disconnected the chat and turned to his bride. I never realized how treacherous it could be just naming a kid. Chapter 5. Jori rolled over in bed and put his arm around Olivia's waist. She edged next to him. What time is it? She asked. You don't have to get up for another half hour. Olivia turned over and snuggled against him. Jori still couldn't believe how happy he was. He could wake up like this every morning for the rest of his life. His thoughts drifted to his grandparents. On the ship he had described their relationship to Lynn, calling it a forever love. It had been his hope that she would believe it was possible for her and Braden. Jori had never dreamed then that he might have a chance at such a thing. He chuckled. What are you laughing at? Olivia shifted her head so she could look at him. As she so often did, she reached up and stroked the scar on his cheek. Why do you do that? Jori asked. He tried not to be self-conscious about it, but she did it a lot. I love it. Olivia pulled his face closer and pressed her lips against the scar. That's crazy. I used to be good-looking. You know I never would have married Jori Virtanen, the model. She kissed his scar again. That wound helped make you the man I fell in love with. The man who saved kids trapped in a car on the train tracks and faced down pirates to protect Elle. But don't ignore me. What were you laughing about? Olivia tried to tickle his ribs, but Jori pinned her hands to her side and kissed the tip of her nose. He told her about his grandparents. Even on the ship at that terrible time in your life, you were a closet romantic. Olivia's expression took on that familiar softness. Her phone dinged. She didn't move, so Jori started to reach across her, but she batted his arm away. It's just a text message. Who's sending my wife text messages? Besides Jose. Olivia slid out from under Jori and reached for her phone. What's he say? Jori tried to read the small screen over her shoulder. Police checking death of PBW's first hub. PBW? Jori asked. It's Jose's code for Scarlet. Possible Black Widow, Olivia said. What else does that message say? Jori took the phone she handed him, and he held it up so they could both read it. Took pics of her with other boyfriends. Has lots. I'll have more later. Jori called Scarlet some choice names, and Olivia took the phone from him. She tossed it aside. Should we tell Marc? For a second, Jori considered his older brother's response to finding out his wife had been cheating on him. Would telling Marc save him any grief? Would he blame the messengers? Jori's own conscience nudged him when he thought about how Nate had secretly made sure Olivia was safe in Great Falls. It had been the right thing to do in Jori's mind, but he doubted she would see it that way. There was always the chance that Marc would hate them for doing a background check on his girlfriend, even if they were right. Was it better to let Marc find out on his own? What do you think? Jori asked. I don't plan to make a habit of this, Olivia said, almost like she could read his mind. We're the suspicious ones and needed to know if our concerns were valid. I agree, but Jori's phone rang on the nightstand. Lynn's ring. He let go of his wife. It's pretty early in Montana. Why is she calling? He picked up the phone and accepted the call. Hey, Lynn. Did you see the news last night? Her voice was tight with emotion. What news? Jori put the phone on speaker while Olivia scrambled for the TV remote. It's Marc. Lynn tried to say something else, but her voice broke. No, Olivia whispered, and muted the television, which was set on a 24-hour news station. The closed captioning scrolled across the bottom of the screen. 17 Americans dead. Lynn, is Braden there? Jori asked, feeling like he had been gut-punched. Let me talk to him. He's not dead, Braden said as soon as he had the phone. They're flying him to Germany. How bad is he hurt? Olivia clung to Jori's arm. We understand he's pretty busted up. They'll have more details later. Are you two going to Germany? As soon as Jori said the words, he wanted to go too. He glanced at Olivia and raised his brows. She frowned, confused. I am. Kira's too little to take, and Lynn shouldn't leave her. I'll bet that's killing her, Jori said, pointing at the phone and hoping Olivia understood. It is. Braden's voice was low. She doesn't want me to go alone. Olivia's mouth opened slightly as understanding of Jori's silent plea flashed across her face. She leaned toward the phone. Jori wants to go. Would you like some company? I love you, Jori mouthed, and Olivia squeezed his hand. You're barely back from your honeymoon, Braden said. You can't come. Jori needs to be with his family at a time like this, she said. Thank you, Braden said, and Jori didn't miss the relief in the man's voice. Meeting up with Braden at the flight change in New York gave Jori a sense of déjà vu. The last time he had connected with someone on a flight like that, it had been Marc. Once they landed, it didn't take long to get the okay to come to the hospital. I hope that's a good sign, Braden said, as they entered a taxi and he gave instructions to be taken to Landstuhl Regional Medical Center. Me too. Jori rubbed his face. He had hardly slept on the plane. his dreams taking on an odd twist to the memories of his own time in the hospital after the pirate attack. I'm glad Lynn will have your father close by. He's really good with her. Before the cruise, I used to worry how he might get on with whoever I married. He took right to Lynn. That's not the way I heard it, Jori said with a dark chuckle. All right, I heard things were a little rough on their first meeting. I think everyone's first meeting with your father is rough, Jori said, thinking of his own experience with the tough rancher. Maybe. Braden played with the phone in his hands. Lynn wants me to take a picture of Mark. He grimaced. So she knows he's all right. That could be really bad. I hope you didn't promise her. Jori forced himself not to touch the scar on his cheek. I looked awful, and I only got hit in the face with a rifle, not blown up by an IED. If he looks very bad, we'll come up with some kind of excuse. Braden shrugged. I've tried to prepare her. They had to wait a while before Mark's doctor could get away to talk to them in her office. She took their hands and invited them to sit down. Your brother-in-law is fortunate. She lifted an X-ray. He got shaken up quite a bit. Concussion and a broken collarbone. The worst is his left leg. May I look at that? Braden asked, reaching for the X-ray. I'm a thoracic surgeon. She handed it over. The good news is that Captain North won't lose his leg. Jori didn't even try to understand all the medical terms Braden and the other doctor went into. Mark wouldn't lose the leg was the good news? What would this mean for him? He was into martial arts like his sister, and he loved to play football. Jori squeezed the bridge of his nose. And what about the scarlet thing? There was no way they could break the news to Mark now. If he has a good night, you can see him in the morning, the doctor said, drawing Jori from his reverie. She stood and reached out her hand again. Once in their hotel room, Braden turned on the laptop he had brought. He called Lynn and added the rest of the family to the chat. He won't lose his leg? Lynn's expression matched the sick feeling in the pit of Jori's stomach. What does that mean? She asked. Will he be able to walk? Eventually, he should be able to. Braden's voice had taken on a calm and reassuring doctor tone. He'll need a lot of physical therapy once it's healed. It's going to be a hard climb, but he can do it. The important thing is to not let him give up. Braden leaned closer to the webcam. Lynn, Mark's young and healthy. He was in great shape when it happened. This could be so much worse. You mean I should be happy because he could be dead? Her expression was flat, her tone bitter. Yes, my love, her husband said simply. Like the 17 who were killed. Jori could read it in Braden's face even though he didn't say the words. Fine, I'll be grateful. Lynn wiped her cheeks and bent to kiss the top of little Kira's head. Jori exchanged a glance with Olivia. Mark was now a wounded warrior and he was barely 25. Jori noted his wife's strained expression as she took in all the grief. She would already be working on something she could do to help. He imagined it would be a show. It wouldn't be about Mark in particular. That would hit too close to home. Jori knew she would find a way to cover the recovery process for wounded veterans and add to the public discussion. When they finally got to see Mark, he looked both better and worse than Jori had feared. Mark was asleep when they arrived, so they were able to observe him. His face had a lot of cuts and bruises, typical of someone who had been in a vehicle accident. What shook Jori was all the stuff attached to Mark, especially his leg. Braden got permission to review Mark's chart. Braden didn't say anything, so Jori assumed it was okay. Well, okay considering the circumstances. He pulled out his phone and started playing a game to distract himself. Hey, Mark croaked. Hey. Jori got to his feet and came to stand on one side of the bed. Looks like you're on extended vacation. Do you remember what your doctor talked about? Braden asked from the other side of the bed. Mark nodded. Jori recognized the fear in his friend's face and wished he could say some magical words that would make everything all right. Depending on how long it takes to heal, Braden hesitated. You and Kira might be learning to walk at the same time. As Mark closed his eyes, Jori didn't miss the defeat there. Before bed, he had done a little research online and been concerned by the number of people who quit physical therapy. Mark couldn't be allowed to give up already. Hey, Marine. Jori clenched the metal bed railing, putting as much disbelief as he could into his next words. You're not going to let a baby beat you, are you? Braden gave a slight nod. Mark's eyes popped open, and Jori was glad to see a flash of anger there.
I bet I'll be walking again before your daughter.
Mark's words came out rough and gravelly, but with more force.
You're on.
Braden reached out his hand. Mark raised his only free one after untangling it from the IV line, and the two men shook on it. Jori caught it with his phone's camera. He made a vow that he wouldn't let Mark forget that agreement.
Thank you for listening to A Season of Change. Be sure to subscribe to my channel to know when new audiobooks or other fun videos are available.
This has been A Season of Change, Safe Harbors Book Number 2.5, written by Donna K. Weaver, narrated by Tristan Hunt. Copyright 2015 by Donna K. Weaver. Production copyright 2015 by Donna K. Weaver.